The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, originally released in 1993 for the Game Boy handheld, is often seen as this quirky, weird side offshoot of the series. This is a Zelda game that has no Zelda, no Ganon, no Hyrule, but what it does have is Goombas from the Mario series. Its place in the franchise history is often seen as that beloved side game that tried to do something different, but was essentially just a detour while waiting for the real evolution of the series, Ocarina of Time. But, just like I don't agree that Zelda 2 is a black sheep of the franchise, I also disagree with the notion that Link's Awakening is a side game. For better or worse, it's an important step in the evolution of the series that would solidify a lot of principles the Legend of Zelda games would follow in the future. Now, you don't need to watch my review of the first and second Zelda games before viewing this one, that's up to you if you want to have some additional context about how the series has progressed. But what I would urge you to watch is my video about A Link to the Past if you haven't, as for the purposes of saving time, we'll be referencing it a lot and drawing a bunch of comparisons. The link can be found in the description and YouTube cards. Link's Awakening exists in 3 iterations. The original 1993 Game Boy release, the updated 1998 DX version for Game Boy Color, and the full-on Switch remake released in 2019. This video will be based off the Switch version, which I consider to be the definitive incarnation of Link's Awakening. Now, of course, the Switch and Game Boy versions are different games on a fundamental level. The Game Boy's screen-based flow of navigation is nothing like Switch's continuous panning approach. The fact that in the remake Link can look in 8 directions means that the way you position yourself in combat is going to be different from the original, among other differences. But despite all this, playing the 2 versions back to back felt like I was playing the same game. Ultimately, they try to provide the same experience, and that's what counts. That being said, we can't ignore the flaws of the remake, which from the technical perspective include pretty noticeable and frequent FPS dips when playing from docked mode. In handheld mode it is much better in that regard, and from the design side, the dungeon creator is incredibly disappointing, but also absolutely optional and ignorable. In turn, not only does the Link's Awakening remake have just a huge number of quality of life improvements, like shield being equipped at all times because it didn't have its dedicated button, but also there is more collectibles to find, which plays upon some strengths of the original and alleviates some of the weaknesses we'll discuss, alongside a bunch of little mechanical updates related to those changes, like how you have to first block shielded enemies to stun them before attacking, rather than frantically try to get into position to hit. And the updated visuals and music really help to get across certain atmospheric and holistic aspects more than the original Game Boy game could due to technical limitations. With all this out of the way, let's jump into my review of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, which as always will be done with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system, starting with design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic with the biggest weight, as the way a game is played and structured is what defines our experience the most. When it comes to the core pillars and principles of the game, Link's Awakening is a direct continuation of A Link to the Past. Everything is focused on combat, exploration and puzzles, wrapped in gameplay that is defined by items and figuring out the best way to use them. The difference is that there's less items in Link's Awakening, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I did say in my Link to the Past video that there's really no item there that can be deemed useless, but by having a smaller amount of equipment, the game can focus on the versatility of each even more. For example, your shield can be used now not just to block projectiles, but also push enemies. In cases of Armos, pushing them in statue form will prevent their activation. Which is also why the shield is now assigned to a button as opposed to being automatic like in A Link to the Past. Pretty much every opponent has a variety of weaknesses that you can figure out by using different items, so this aspect is still fantastic. What adds even more to the versatility aspect is the possibility to combine items together. If you have bombs and bow equipped, pressing both at the same time will make you shoot bomb arrows, which is a very effective way to deal with some enemies or groups. Rock's Feather allows you to jump, but if you use it while sprinting with the Pegasus boots, you will jump farther. What's great about this combination is that if you use it skillfully, you can cross certain pits and holes in dungeons that otherwise would require you to go around. And in the Nintendo Switch version, with the added third dimension and updated control scheme, some enemies have received mechanical updates. I've already mentioned the shielded opponents, but there are other examples like these Zero Bomber guys who can't really be cornered and beaten by a sword anymore. It's best to try either throw an object at them or use something like a hookshot or boomerang to stun first. So I would say that from a mechanical standpoint, the item aspect in Link's Awakening is handled even better than in A Link to the Past. That's great, especially considering that satisfaction in both games is driven not from basic movement or combat, but finding out how to effectively use the items in your inventory to interact with the world. Which itself is handled elegantly, especially considering the technical limitations of Game Boy in comparison to SNES. Since the original game had to resort to showcasing the whole world screen by screen, Link's Awakening doesn't really have big stretches of open areas. Rather, it is divided into very clear small sections that are interconnected with one another. There's the village area, the mysterious forest, the swamp, the mountains, the prairie, the cemetery, the lake, the beach, the desert. Neither of them is particularly big, but all of them are distinct, so you never really have any problems understanding where you are located now. Because of this screen-based paradigm, what the original game tried to do is to make every screen matter. Cohesion Island is packed with characters and secrets. There's something for you to do on every map sector, an aspect that the remake has made even greater by implementing progression into existing side activities like fishing and the trendy game, and adding even more collectibles like secret seashells and heart pieces for you to find in the world. The remake having more things to do and discover in the existing areas smooths out what is ostensibly the biggest weakness of Link's Awakening, a very rigid and pretty questionable structure of the entire experience. And the problem is not the fact that Link's Awakening is much more linear, though that much is true. If in A Link to the Past the dungeon order is a mix of guided and freeform approaches, in Link's Awakening they all have to be done in the same order. Yes, I know that technically you can get the key item from one dungeon and leave before completing it, but that's not natural player behavior. And the flow of getting items is much more linear as well. If A Link to the Past featured a wide network of mandatory and optional equipment, in Link's Awakening most of the things are mandatory. Even the 14 items that exist solely for the purpose of being traded all over the world are required for the game's completion, though it looks like they're optional, which might put you in a tricky spot if you believed that to be true. And this is what makes everything feel very rigid, how arbitrary a lot of progression blockers are. The game is essentially a chain of world quests and dungeons. First you do a quest, then you can access a dungeon. You do another quest, access another dungeon. Rinse and repeat. After dungeon 4, a ghost starts following you. Leading it back to its old house is actually a touching moment, but you can't enter dungeon 5 until you finish this quest that literally has nothing to do with the main goal and rewards an optional item. But the bigger problem is how you unlock access to different parts of Cohesion Island. You see, unlike A Link to the Past, where you start in a limited area, after which you get access to a huge part of Hyrule, and then some items become required to open up the remaining sections, in Link's Awakening the whole world is gated by items, and after each dungeon you unlock things bit by bit. First you can explore only the village and the beach that's next to it. After getting your sword, you can explore the mysterious forest and a little bit of Cohesion Prairie. Then in the first dungeon you get Rock's Feather, which allows you to jump over holes, so now you can access a bit more of the world. Then in the second dungeon you get the Bracelet, so you can start picking up boulders and check out a little bit more. But then you're blocked by obstacles that require Pegasus boots, flippers, hookshot. You get the point, everything is unlocked gradually. Conceptually this is fine, but the way it's implemented in Link's Awakening actively discourages exploration until you're pretty far into the game. For the purposes of comparison, in A Link to the Past's light world there are only 2 boulders that are blocking new areas. The rest are either shortcuts or secrets. In Link's Awakening, there are 8 paths towards new areas that are blocked by boulders. Some of them are different entrances to the same location, and that is without counting secrets and caves within the areas you could get to without a power bracelet. So once you unlock Rock's Feather and can start jumping over gaps, you're excited to see everything that this new possibility opens up, only to discover that you keep getting blocked by rocks. You found a secret passageway in a cemetery? Too bad, once on the other side of it, you see that the exit is blocked by rocks and you can't do anything. You had enough precision to jump over 2 hole tiles without Pegasus boots? Yeah, whatever. Let's say you finally got that power bracelet that allows you to lift rocks, so you decide to check out what's behind the boulders on the beach. Well, that is a house, and a set of 3 holes that require Pegasus boots to go further. Were the rocks really necessary there from a design standpoint then? Is hiding this house that is going to be used in a quest much later really that important? This aspect of double-layered progression blockers is probably one of the most annoying parts of Link's Awakening. In Mabe Village, the location you start in, there is a building blocked by boulders. Yeah, I'm mentioning them a lot because there's tons of them. This house teases you from the very beginning of the game. So once you complete the second dungeon and are able to lift the rocks up, you excitedly go back to the village, pick up those rocks, get inside, and... well, essentially find out that you can't do anything until you get the Pegasus boots. Bummer. In the mysterious forest, there is a tree-log entrance blocked by rocks. But after you get in, you find out that there you need a hookshot which you won't get until Dungeon 5. Again, why were the rocks there? None of those things are that bad when taken on their own, but holistically, all this increases the amount of places you need to keep in your mental map to such a degree that it becomes overwhelming. At least the Nintendo Switch version has the possibility to add pins so you would remember to go back to that area. But it's really a crutch to progression blockers that are absolutely unjustified. Not only from the double-layered perspective, as there is no need for exploration to be blocked with 2 items when a block with 1 item that is acquired later would achieve the same goal, but also when you actually reach those new areas, you eventually discover that you don't need to use your new item that much. For example, this is an area that is responsible for getting into Dungeon 3, accessible after you have the bracelet to be able to lift boulders. To get access to the 3rd dungeon, you first need to get to Canalet Castle here and get 5 golden leaves that you need to bring to Richard here, so you could get into his backyard and find a key that will unlock the entrance to the dungeon here, to reach which you need to jump over different islands in a nearby lake. What you'll be using the most throughout all this is items like your sword, naturally, a shovel that you need to buy, bombs, your jumping rocks further of course. What you will practically be not using in this segment of the game is your Dungeon 2 bracelet. You need it only 3 times. Once to throw a rock at a tree in Canalet Castle, and 2 times to destroy doors with pots. Once in Canalet Castle itself, and once in the first room of Key Cavern Dungeon, and only there. The rest can be completed without the bracelet and your other tools are utilized more often. So why is everything blocked in the first place? It'll be fine to remove those 3 mandatory uses and essentially just leave the rocks next to Mabe Village to prevent players from accessing the area very early in the beginning, and later on this will be used as a bracelet-based shortcut. But blocking the whole thing from all directions, preventing exploration and the possibility to complete the 2 dungeons in whichever order you find them in just because there are few pretty meaningless mandatory uses of an item you need to find beforehand? That's not great. The linear dungeon progression of Link's Awakening is hardly justified. There is no real narrative nor gameplay reasoning for that. Actually, if we take a look at the dungeons outside of the overworld context, this is their potential order of completion based on pure item requirements within the dungeons themselves. And if we remove the single arbitrary use of some items in a couple dungeons, this is what it would transform into. Much more enticing towards exploring. But really, the purpose of this schematic is just to point out all the weird arbitrations that Link's Awakening is riddled with. Some are ironic in a way. For example, you need Mirror's Shield from Eagle's Tower, Dungeon 7, only 1 time to get past the fire towards Turtle Rock, Dungeon 8. That's the only puzzle in the entire game that requires Mirror's Shield. You don't have to use it in Turtle Rock proper at all. But you know what you have to use? The bow. It's weird that with how strict Link's Awakening is with its gating, it doesn't make sure you have it before entering the dungeon. Though the bow may seem optional as it's a very expensive shop item that doesn't appear in the game from the beginning, so you might not even know it's there if you don't revisit the shop after a certain point, it's needed for one particular statue in the 8th dungeon that you have to shoot in the eye, the only statue like that in the entire game. And yes, the bow is very effective against a number of enemies. but there are alternative means to defeat all of them, so nothing in the game ever blocks you if you don't have it, until this statue. You can argue that A Link to the Past had a similar situation with the Ice Rod, but you receive a hint about the rod's location fairly early on as part of a mandatory story conversation, so the game does push you towards it. Then there's the whole thing of Link's Awakening being inconsistent with how handheld it is. Sometimes you can't go a couple steps without the owl appearing to tell you where to go, and at other times you literally might have no idea what you're supposed to do now unless you enter a telephone hint booth, the existence of which makes sure you never get stuck, of course, but it's weird because even when you seemingly have freedom, there is really only one particular specific thing that you must do. Some quests between dungeons are neatly localized to areas not far from their respective dungeons, and some send you all over the world. For example, to get into Angler's Tunnel, you first have to get to Animal Village, to find out that there is a walrus blocking the path to the desert, so you have to go back to Mabe Village to find Marin, only to find out that she's not there anymore and you have to go to the beach to bring her back to Animal Village. Then you explore the desert and get the key to the dungeon which you need to use here, but you can't enter the dungeon from that location as you have to go all the way around towards the top of the mountain to jump from it to the dungeon's entrance. Feels like padding. For all it's worth, all these problems pertain to the overworld. The underworld most of the time is handled much more elegantly and dungeons are more freeform in nature. For example, this is the first dungeon of the game, Tail Cave. Not only does the entrance immediately feature two different paths you might take, half of the dungeon is available for exploration without a single key. Now, this might seem overwhelming at first, but Link's Awakening is very smart. Regardless of which way you choose at the beginning, you will enter a room that has a small key available, so there is literally no wrong first choice. And here there is another choice between two rooms, but both of them will lead to the central large chamber, which has another small key. So you can get 3 small keys in the area that's immediately accessible to you, and the dungeon has 3 locked doors in total. Now there are actually some other really smart things going on here. This room has a button which makes a chest with a key appear, so if you go this way you will naturally try to press the button and will get a key. However, this other room you can choose doesn't have a button. The key will appear only if you deal with all enemies by pushing them off the ledge in this case, and if you haven't played a Zelda game before, this wouldn't be immediately apparent as a requirement, you can just run past by. But the room you will run to houses a chest with a compass, and the compass in Link's Awakening has a very cool new feature. Not only does it show chest locations, it also beeps in the room where there is a key. So when you go back, if you haven't taken the key beforehand, the compass will beep. And there is nothing else in this room besides enemies for you to take care of, so you do and get the key. Very elegant. Another cool thing about this dungeon is that even though there are 3 locked doors locked by small keys and you find all 3 of them in this area, only 2 doors can actually be opened. Now, this door leads to a room where you have to push a block to continue. Again, if you haven't played a Zelda game before, it might not be immediately apparent. But there is a beakless owl statue, and you find the beak for it in the room accessed through the second locked door. So now you'll go back to the first room and the stone statue will give you a hint about the block, and boom, you progress further. Of course, since the choice is up to you, this can happen without any backtracking. And even if you figured out the block push without an owl beak, you will still have to enter this room because it leads to the boss chamber. But you won't be able to get there without the dungeon's key item, Rock's Feather, that gives you the ability to jump and thus provides access to the rest of the environment. And here we get to the first design principle difference between A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. The dungeon item is required to beat the dungeon, with the exception of the dungeon that holds the mirror shield. But you can't explore other dungeons fully without their respective key items. Which also leads to the second design principle difference. You don't need big keys to open up chests that hold key items. Big keys transformed into nightmare keys that unlock the room with the final dungeon boss and the respective MacGuffin that you need to collect for narrative purposes. And besides the final boss, each dungeon at a certain point also has a mini-boss. After you defeat them, their room is transformed into a teleport room, allowing you to move between that chamber and the entrance. And in every dungeon, except the mirror shield one, you need the key item you find to defeat at least one of those 2 bosses. For example, in the Tail Cave we're examining, Rock's Feather is necessary to avoid attacks of the Rolling Bones mini-boss, but you don't need it necessarily for the final Moldorm boss. And this is another very elegant design decision, because it increases the importance of a key item within a dungeon without making it too predictable whether you will need it for the final boss or not. So this is how dungeons work in Link's Awakening on a high level. All the principles from A Link to the Past still apply, but now there is a big distinction between the exploration before you find the key item and after, which recontextualizes the dungeon. But unlike the overworld, it doesn't overwhelm you. Usually there's 2 or 3 locations you have to remember. Variety is achieved in several ways. First, through map shapes in the vein of the original Zelda. The Bottle Grotto has the shape of, well, a bottle. Key Cavern looks like a key. But also it's a matter of pacing. So if in Tail Cave you get 3 keys to 3 locked doors at the very beginning, in the aforementioned Key Cavern you get 1 key and 4 locked doors. But to make sure that the dungeon has a smooth progression, only one of those doors is actually required to get to a more open area. In general, the first 4 dungeons are pretty similar in difficulty despite their shape and pace variance, but the latter 4 can get really elaborate, especially Eagle's Tower. I suppose no Link's Awakening video can go without mentioning that dungeon. It is often seen as the best one in the game. I disagree. It's definitely the most memorable and unique one. First, it is the only multi-floor dungeon here with 4 floors. There is Key Cavern with 2 floors and the rest use just 1. Eagle's Tower really asks you to think about dungeons as 3-dimensional spaces due to the mechanic of jumping into a hole to get onto the lower floor, which is not a fail state but the actual requirement to progress. And the second phase doesn't just recontextualize the dungeon, it literally changes it. The key item here is Mirror Shield, and as I've already said, it's not really important for this dungeon in particular except for defending against the laser eye statues. And that's because, in terms of structure, the tower's key item is this huge metal ball, and you need to destroy 4 columns across the second floor to bring the tower down and combine 2 of the floors together. This is certainly an amazing and memorable concept, but it's not really implemented well. First, the 3rd floor is useless in the first stage, you don't need it until you combine it together with the 4th one. Then, a lot of gameplay is focused on switching which block color is up. Here's the thing though, whenever you realize you need to make a change, that can take some time, because this dungeon doesn't really feature shortcuts. Which is annoying not only in cases when you need to make a switch, but also when the metal ball falls into one of the holes, so you need to take it all the way from the beginning the same way you did before. So even though Eagle's Tower is conceptually impressive, in terms of gameplay it's quite annoying. Turtle Rock, for example, is far better designed. It's the biggest dungeon out there, but it doesn't feel overwhelming due to how smartly it's sectioned off into practically 3 different areas you access from the central hall, and then it expands only after you get the key item. There's plenty of shortcuts that you can take, and the local dungeon's gimmick, a machine that creates floor in the direction of your stick movement, is actually used consistently and with progression, which is not always the case in Link's Awakening dungeons. That same Turtle Rock dungeon is the only eye statue in the game that we have discussed. In Face Shrine, there is a chest that opens up only after throwing a pot at it. It's the only chest like this in the game, there is nothing that plays with this concept either before or after. The same room has an owl statue that will tell you the solution if you're stuck. I suppose the massive amount of pots should have been a hint, but not really. There is only a single dungeon where you have to dive into water to get onto another screen. Even in the dungeon with the underwater boss, you get there through stairs. And again, because this is not something that is ever properly set up or used after, the game puts an owl statue to hint at that. And it's a shame because there are so many moments of literal design brilliance in Link's Awakening, things that make you go, holy shit, this is awesome. But there's also a huge amount of arbitrary design choices, things that are just there. And at times it feels like the game itself thinks that those are a crutch, because otherwise it wouldn't need to add hints that are needed exactly one time for those specific purposes. So if you are to open up all the scores for design, I will assign an 8. Link's Awakening is full of fantastic and quite brilliant elements that are not connected well, both from high-level and detailed perspectives. There is not enough freedom, and yet there is also lack of direction. A lot in the game feels arbitrary. That said, the game's structure, redefined dungeon design principles, and new activities like trading sequences are going to become an inspiration for the Zelda franchise moving forward, but that is a discussion for another time. Now, let's talk about context. This is a category with the weight of one, as it's about things that enhance the experience rather than define it. Plot, world, characters, motivation, and so on. Link's Awakening is an old game, but if you would want to avoid spoilers, skip to aesthetics category, as we can't discuss the game's world, story, and characters without touching upon the central twist of the game. Ready? Okay, so, at the beginning of Link's Awakening you shipwreck on Cohesion Island and are told that to escape you need to wake up the Windfish. But later on you find out that the whole world you're in is but a dream of the Windfish. So at the end of the game, the island you've been exploring all this time disappears, together with all its inhabitants. They stay only in your memory. That's quite heavy. After a well-told but very standard good versus evil tale, I didn't expect the Zelda franchise to go straight into existentialism. But it did. Now, honestly, it's not like this whole setting is that big of a secret. The game never hides it. The title is called Link's Awakening. The bosses you defeat are nightmares. There's all this weird stuff going on, like a Mario Bow Wow that is referred to have fur and behaves like an actual dog, and a person saying that later he'll be lost in the mountains, and, well, that's exactly what happens. So it's not something that is actively hidden until a certain point. One might say that we don't even need the spoiler tag, but still there are moments that try to recontextualize the whole setting you're in, and that's commendable. That said, Link's Awakening doesn't really use its narrative hook to explore any interesting or poignant questions. Most of the time, this dream environment is used as a reason for the existence of strange and quirky characters that fill the world. Oh hey, I'm going to give you a game-related hint, but don't ask me what it means, I'm just a kid. Oh hey, I'm a goat who's catfishing a hermit on the other side of the island. And I'm a character from a totally different Japanese Game Boy only game that you're unlikely to have heard about. But there is one anchor that makes this all work, that grounds the existentialist themes so they could hit you quite hard. And that's Marin. She appears at the very beginning of the game as an obvious stand-in for Zelda. Hell, Link even asks her if she is Zelda. But she's not just a MacGuffin, and not just a gameplay tool, even though she would be the one who teaches you the Ballad of the Windfish, the song that's needed to wake the Windfish up from its dream that's getting invaded by nightmares. Marin has a life. She has a father who cares for her. The inhabitants of Animal Village love listening to her singing. Marin has dreams. She wants to become a seagull so she could roam free. You go out on what is essentially a date with her. She can comment on your performance of the song she taught. She's a literal pro at a trendy game that gets banned from playing again, and at one point you find her in the mountains because she tried to sing the waking up song to the windfish's egg. It's not an amazing amount of depth, but it's enough to paint her as a real person, and by extension imply that everyone else on this island is also a real person with their own set of dreams and goals and desires. And that's why you can question whether you're doing the right thing, whether the fact that everybody here is a figment of Windfish's imagination is worth their destruction. But at the end of the day, all these people will still live on in your memories. And if you finish the game with no deaths, which in the Switch remake with its additional hearts and the ability to capture fairies in the bottles is not that difficult, it is implied that Marin's wish to the Windfish was granted, and she did become a seagull. If we are to open up all the scores for context, I will assign a 7. Link's Awakening has a very interesting theme, and while it doesn't explore it in a particularly meaningful way, thanks to Marin, it does enough to make you care. And that's what transforms it into an enjoyable story. Time to discuss aesthetics. This is another category with the weight of one, as it's again about things that enhance the experience rather than define it, this time through visual style, music, sounds, etc. I suppose the first thing that we should discuss is the visual style of the Switch remake. It is quite a big departure from the original Game Boy title that in its sprite work was very similar to A Link to the Past from SNES, which, while cartoony, sort of implied a little bit more realistic proportions in a way. The Switch remake goes for a very clean motion kind of look, and it's one of those directions that, even if you dislike it, you can't really say that it doesn't fit given what we have discussed in the context category. Everything looks like it's a set of toys that you're zooming towards with a camera, which is also why there is a heavy depth of field effect on the edges. And despite me loving the style, I am personally not a fan of that particular decision. But again, I get why it's there, so I don't consider that to be a problem for the game. I just dislike such a use of depth of field personally. But I think the true genius of this art style is that it's not only something that fits with the story of the game, it is also something that fits with its world design. Because the way everything is sectioned off into such incredibly distinct areas is exactly how many dioramas would work. And it's not like it lacks life or anything. There are so many cool details, from the way emotions are shown on characters' eyes, to Borblins nose sniffing, to just leaves swaying around a bit. Its toys come to life, true life. And it's a bit surreal, but also is a perfect fit for Link's Awakening. I also love the chosen musical style for the remake. Listen to this rendition of the franchise main theme. It may not be as epic as a more orchestral score would be, but also Link's Awakening is not an epic story. It's pretty personal and surreal. This is also the first Zelda game where music becomes an important part of the story itself. There is a lot of leitmotifs surrounding the Ballad of the Windfish, and I absolutely adore the moment when Link and Marin played together. And just in general, there are so many wonderful tracks like the one we hear while searching for a sword. Honestly, it's a crime that we never hear this tune after finding the weapon. Then there's the energetic Telltale Heights theme. There's just too many wonderful tunes to list, it will be a video on its own. Something that I want to mention specifically though is that there is also a deep connection between the soundtrack and the game. As part of the story you have to find 8 musical instruments, and those instruments are the same ones that often take central stage in the remake soundtrack. Again, just a really smart choice. If you open up all the scores, I will definitely assign a 10 to Link's Awakening. The chosen visual and musical style are great and fit the game, and there is just an extreme amount of polish and wonderful little details. Speaking of details, let's move on to Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it's all about how well different elements of the game are connected together. We have already discussed how the aesthetic aspects of the game fit the story and the world design, which definitely plays a role in this category as well. And, in a way, without revealing anything if you've skipped the context category, when it comes to certain characters or events being weird or not making sense, it makes sense that some things don't make sense. But I want to discuss another aspect that's rarely touched upon, and that certainly influences Cohesion, and that's theming. For example, let's take the second dungeon of the game, Bottle Grotto. It's shaped like a bottle. It has a lot of bottle-shaped objects, pots mainly. The dungeon's treasure is an item that will let you pick those up, and the boss is a genie in a bottle. That's theming. And Link's Awakening is really good at that, not just when it comes to dungeons, but the world itself. That said, we can't ignore how arbitrary the design can feel, and I know that it makes sense that some things don't make sense, but not when it hurts gameplay, and the narrative aspects aren't fully fleshed out. That's why, if we open up all the scores, I don't really have a lot to talk about here this time, I will assign an 8 to Link's Awakening. It has a very good connective tissue, especially for a title that was originally released for Game Boy, but it doesn't quite fully get there. Of course, there's nothing bad in that. Now, time for our final category, Emotions. This is the most subjective part of Stasocritic, as it is all about personal feelings, but as personal feelings matter a lot, it has the second biggest weight, 3. I have never owned a Game Boy or Game Boy Color as a child. In fact, I haven't played the original Link's Awakening release until after trying out the Switch remake. And then in preparation for this video I replayed both back to back. Here we come to what's probably a very big lesson. Simplicity doesn't mean that a game can't hit you straight in the feels regardless. The narrative lacks a certain amount of depth. Some characters are very one-note and are there just to be weird. Cohesion Island as a world is essentially about a pastiche of differently themed environments. But, when I finished the game, when I saw those final moments that I showed in the context section, I was speechless, conflicted, in a good way. I felt that it's not like there was really any other choice, but I also couldn't help but think that Link and by extension me, since I controlled him, made a deep mistake. But was there a way to not make that mistake? Probably not. And it all stayed with me. I can certainly see how so many kids would have been enthralled by Link's Awakening on their little handhelds, and even as an adult, I was enthralled as well. Keep in mind that I also knew the twist beforehand. I knew everything this game was about, I just didn't play it, and it still hit me. I still needed a moment to process everything. That's the power of smart, holistic choices. Sure, some of Link's Awakening design decisions have frustrated me a lot. Even more so the fact that they were not caused by technical limitations, so despite a lot of improvements, I also didn't consistently enjoy the gameplay as much as I have in A Link to the Past, for example. But this doesn't prevent me from assigning a 10. Link's Awakening doesn't have heart-pounding drama, deep character arcs, and it doesn't really use gameplay itself to create strong feelings. It's a pretty standard game when you look at it that way. But still, after completing it, I felt that I went through something. Because it wasn't just a simple game. It was something more. That's why it gets the score, and it's time to summarize everything. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening gets a final Stasocritic rating of 85. It's a great game, and the way I look at it, especially coming directly from A Link to the Past, is that A Link to the Past is a better game, but Link's Awakening is a better experience. I also think that it's worthy of note that this was a Game Boy title, and it tried to push the boundaries to mean something more than just an engaging game to play. It might not be the first one to do that, but in the late 80s and early 90s there certainly wasn't a lot of games that tried, simply because it was still a pretty early era for games as a medium, and many were figuring how they actually function in the first place, let alone try to create feelings. And I think Link's Awakening is underappreciated in a way, because even though it is beloved, most of the time it seems to be discussed in the context of being a side game. But it tried to push the medium forward, and it did push the franchise forward, so it certainly is not an ignorable step in the Legend of Zelda's evolution between A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. It is important historically, and it's pretty damn good. Despite a number of its flaws that I've mentioned, you will not regret trying it out. It is, indeed, a classic, and the Switch remake is great. But do try to ignore its dungeon chamber side activity, there is a reason I didn't mention it anywhere at all.